So, hey, everybody. Welcome to this very, very special interview today that we're having with Dave Siever of Mind Alive. And as you can see, things are looking pretty bright here. They're looking so bright, I got to wear shades. And these are actually part of a device that Dave Siever developed called, interestingly and not uncoincidentally, the DAVID, Digital Audiovisual Integration Device, and is actually, looks a little bit, I want to make sure I'm holding this up right, looks a little bit like this, and also comes with a very stylish set of headphones. But audiovisual stimulation, or audiovisual entrainment, as it is often called, is a technology that's been around for a few decades now. But I don't think I'm overstepping things to say that Dave Siever really took this sort of fledgling technology that was being co-opted a lot by, people for entertainment purposes, and turned it into a viable therapeutic tool, and a tool that can be used to improve all aspects of your mental, emotional, cognitive well-being. And so my introduction to the field of neurotechnology way back in the, early 80s, something like that, mid 80s, was actually through an earlier version of this device that Dave developed. And it opened my eyes to the power of neurotechnology and gave me one of the first glimpses I ever had in my life of feeling, free from my depressive tendencies. So it ultimately led me to the field of neurofeedback, which I spent more than 20 years now as a clinician. But there's a special place in my heart for this technology, and a special place in my heart for Dave Siever, who's a really good friend of mine. And anyway, I want to interview Dave today. I want to interview you here and have everybody get to know you, and have everybody get to know this wonderful mind tool, just in case you haven't figured out what to give that special loved one for Christmas this year, or for really any occasion. It doesn't have to be Christmas, birthdays, bar mitzvahs, Easter, whatever gift-giving ideas. So Dave, why don't you start out by telling everybody a little bit here how it is that you got started with this whole field, and what is brainwave entrainment?
Well, how I got started was, I tell you, completely happenstance. As growing up as a teenager and stuff, I was always fascinated with electronics and psychology. So it was a perfect fit for my career, if not life mission in reality. But I landed a job at the university building a research lab to treat TMJ dysfunction. And while we were there, we were making splints for everyone, the little plastic things you put in your mouth to kind of balance your bite. And while we were there, I started realizing that there was a psychological aspect to people with tense jaws and grinding their teeth and jaw pain and neck pain and shoulder pain and all that.
Definitely, yeah.
And which dentists never saw. They always saw it just as a tooth problem and a malocclusion problem. So what I did, and this was in the 80s. Now, Alberta is a big oil-producing province. We have a huge amount of oil, and you've probably heard of the tar sands.
Oh, yeah.
It's expensive to extract the oil, so we need higher oil prices to make a profit. And in the 80s, oil dropped down to $12 a barrel. At least Alberta oil did. And so I started developing life events. Well, I started using a life event scale and developing a fairly sophisticated intake form with 500 of our patients that we had at the University of Alberta, and discovered that 90% of them were wives of oil workers. And that was a real surprise. Nobody saw that coming, and it turned out, of course, because there was a lot of concerns about losing their jobs and all this. There were typically younger marriages, and younger marriages often still are working out the kinks. They had one or two toddlers, and high risk of their husbands losing their jobs. and or getting wage rollbacks and things. So the two main life events that occurred prior to developing jaw pain were financial worries and increase in arguments with spouse.
Yeah.
It also turns out that women are much more concerned and sensitive about the domestic or the social side of relationships than guys are. Guys are typically pretty clueless, it turns out. I was once a pretty clueless guy.
I'll leave that alone.
You won't, yeah, you'll just play along.
I'll just play along with that, yeah.
A good social technique there. I like it. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, diplomatic. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, and because a lot of guys are clueless, women take it amongst themselves to manage the relationship. And when the relationship goes bad, women blame themselves because they really see themselves as, as people who can manage things. And how many times have you heard about, girls trying to manage their boyfriends and stuff like this, and it often ultimately fails, but
right, yeah.
But then they blame themselves. Guys blame them too.
Yeah.
Generally speaking. So the guys don't get the stress, but the women get a huge amount of stress. And so that was going on. And then I started making biofeedback systems for people to relax their jaws and teach them how, and as you know, biofeedback and teaching about their jaw tensions and this and that. But at the same time, this is when, in 1984, there was an instructor in performing arts who had heard of the idea of the concept of audiovisual entrainment. The research originally started in 1934, where they found you could drive brain waves with flashing lights.
Right.
And there had been a fair bit of hypnotic induction research done in the 50s and 60s. And so he commissioned me to build him a machine that he could use to help his performing arts students overcome stage fright. And it took me like 9 months to build this device. It was really intriguing, I tell you. It was really intriguing when I was building it and seeing what the effect of lights were on my own psyche and on my brain and whatever else. But finally, in June of 85, I got him a device. And he started using it on his students, and he was saying it was working exceptionally well. Meanwhile, though, I had made $1 an hour developing it. And so I was hoping he was going to pay me more. A lot of the development costs were because he didn't know what he was actually doing. And so I redesigned it 3 or 4 times before we got it right. And anyway, he was very clear he didn't have the money, but he would name it in such a way that I'd feel honored. I wanted to call it NeuroSync or HemiStim or some kind of a techie name. He says, let's call it a Dave. And I go, geez.
Oh, yeah, twist my arm. Ouch, ouch, ouch.
Gee, how honored do I feel there? I said...
Also, you didn't name it after yourself. Somebody else did that for you.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, most people think it's me. They go, oh, it must be kind of self-important. And I go, no, I didn't name this. It wasn't my idea. And I said, come on now, just calling it David, that doesn't thrill me at all. Then that's when he said, well, digital audiovisual integration device, integrating brainwave activity with digital audiovisual stimulation.
Yep.
And I thought, well, that was kind of a catchy acronym, but I still planned on changing it to, NeuroStim or something. But, we made 100 units. What I should say right after that is I started using it on myself because I was struggling with a lot of anxiety. I still to this day sometimes struggle with anxiety, and a lot of that has to do with growing up in a violent family. Mm-hmm. And so I had PTSD as a child and all that stuff. And so I struggled with a lot of that stuff. And this calmed me down so fast and so effectively that I started using it on our TMJ patients. And then we published a study in 1988 showing that we could relax a really tense jaw in people who had had pain for 10 years. And inside of 10 minutes, they were completely relaxed and their pain was gone. Yeah. And I was really blown away by this because up until that point, I wasn't sure if this was just a new age fad, like just a gimmick, because most of the prior, outside of some of the hypnosis studies and the fact that there were physiological experiments showing that it does drive brainwaves, most of it was using it as strobe lights at parties and things like this. That tune in and trip out was really almost a Timothy Leary thing.
Right, yeah.
Going on with it, right? So when we did this study in 1988 and showed how powerful it was on relaxing jaw pain, then I got really excited about it. And that's when I then spent hundreds of hours at the Health Sciences Library digging up research. And in the process, I found out so much stuff about entrainment. And then I started writing our book on it. And we started sending that out with all our devices. We started trying to get into lecture at the different conferences. And that in itself was extremely difficult. Everybody thought
you were taking something out of the recreational realm, out of the entertainment realm, and trying to bring it into a more therapeutic context. And that is not an easy thing to accomplish.
No, it's not, because you're not starting from scratch. You're already starting with the pre-existing bias that I'm trying to promote a toy.
Exactly.
For professional use.
Another example of this was, you mentioned Timothy Leary in the 60s. The researchers were genuinely scientifically curious about LSD and what it did in the brain, and et cetera, et cetera. And then, our friend, Siegfried Othmer, he was telling us that when he worked at UCLA, there was like a whole vat of it sitting there in the laboratory, whole vat, enough to send, LA
10,000 people or more, a million people.
Yeah, a million people multiple times over on trips.
Yeah.
And the day that Timothy Leary came to the campus, that vat, disappeared, and the interest in that whole subject disappeared, because now it was more of just sort of a cultural novelty, and it was no longer, being taken as serious by researchers.
That's right, yeah.
What you've accomplished with this is truly unique, and I just want to tell you that I really deeply respect that about you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also respect the fact that when you sell a device, you're not just selling stuff. Well, you are selling stuff, but when the money comes back in, a good chunk of it goes right back into research and development.
Yeah. Given how much I know about nutrition, I have a tendency to undersell the device. I say, well, try this and try that. Get the vitamin D, get minerals, do this, do that. Yeah. Do these things first. Then if you're not doing better, then we'll get your machine, right?
Yeah.
Because especially when it comes to insomnia, there's so many causes of insomnia. And people want to buy a device for insomnia. I go, well, we've got a 50-50 chance it'll work. But why don't we get to the real cause of it first and try a bunch of nutritional things first? Because they might fix you right up. And if they don't, then that's get you on the device.
Some combination thereof, right?
Yeah. Same thing with brain mapping. Well, I should get into that a little bit. So I did a lot of research, of course, on this, and then started trying to present at conferences, and slowly bought people's trust enough to finally do a 20-minute lecture at a Future Health conference.
Oh, yeah.
They let me do another 20-minute one, and then they let me do an hour one. And then I'd been schmoozing with, of course, many university professors and stuff who run conferences, and so they let me do a little one then at the AAPB conference, Applied Psychophysiology for Biofeedback and Research. Association for Applied Psychophysiology.
And
then they let me do a little one, and I presented our TMJ study. Then there was another one, then another one. Then some researchers started getting involved in a serious way, like Carter and Russell out of Texas. They did some ADHD studies. And then we did some ADHD studies with Michael Joyce and such, and published those.
I remember Michael Joyce. In fact, I worked at the facility where that was first implemented.
Yeah, that's right. I had a chance to go.
Yeah.
And then we did SAD. Then we did more. I actually hired co-op students in the psychology program from the University of Alberta to do the research for me, and started presenting more of that. Then other universities started getting their students to take on entrainment studies for their dissertations, and now we've got several. Must have 15 studies done by grad students at this point in time. So we gradually shifted. It only took, 30 years and tens of thousands of hours of very hard work to slowly shift the mentality around, where so many clinicians now actually take entrainment as their first line of approach when they're working with all kinds of disorders. Mm. And now we've got research on just tons of stuff. I mean, the Semper Fi Marine Fund buys about $40 a month for Marines with PTSD and concussions. Our latest concussion work has been mind-blowing. How I've been taking people who have been shut down for years following concussion, and inside of a 30-minute session, we fired their brain back up.
Wow.
And it's all documented on EEG. Plus, we also document it all on behavioral indexes and cognitive performance indexes as well, because they need to show it behaviorally, not just on an EEG.
Now, do you have this in published research yet?
I haven't published that. I've got a 90-minute video on YouTube right now that explains it all.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not been, I'm still collecting more research. And the reason being is we're looking at a unique type of brain injury, which I have termed a thalamocortical disconnect. And that is where the thalamus gets disconnected from the cortex, so they don't make alpha waves.
Mm.
They also have really bad phase problems in delta and in beta. And we think the delta phase problems is because if neurons don't get a synchronization pulse, they will fire randomly on their own in the delta band.
Now, you may want to talk a little bit about beta, alpha, theta, delta, because some of the people watching this may not be familiar with what those terms mean.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have got into that too much.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll come back to that in a little bit. But
Okay.
beta are more your thinking waves, when you're cognitive and you're sharp and your eyes are open and you're doing tasks. And then when we relax, more like relaxed attention, beta slows down into what they call the SMR, or sensory motor rhythm band, but that's about 12 cycles, 13 cycles per second. When we close our eyes, we typically make a lot of 10 cycles per second activity, which is alpha. When we meditate, we can make huge amounts of alpha, including frontal, not just, normally when we close our eyes, it's more in the back. Mm-hmm. And when we meditate, if we're good at meditating, we flood ourselves with alpha. And if we're really good at meditating, we can really slow the alpha down to the Schumann resonance. Mm-hmm. And most very good meditators actually have a Schumann resonance form of alpha at 7.8 hertz.
Right, exactly. That's right at the alpha theta border.
So not only is it there for creativity, but there might be something unique about the Schumann resonance in terms of effects on the brain.
And the Schumann resonance being the resonant frequency of the Earth's inner ionosphere.
So the lightning strikes actually cause a lot of it. And so it bounces around the Earth at 7.8 hertz. But it's been speculated that rebar in buildings and metal in buildings and all that stuff is shutting down our ability to naturally pick up. That we've actually learned through evolution to harmonize with the Schumann resonance, and it does good things for us. And there were studies that were done where they took kids into Faraday cages, like university college students, and that were grounded to the earth so no Schumann resonance could get into the cage, and the kids got really miserable and moody and dysfunctional. And then when they turned on a Schumann generator that would send this wave throughout these rooms they were living in, this Faraday cage, their moods would improve dramatically. But another interesting thing, though, is Fox and Rakely did a PET scan study where they were looking at cerebral blood flow. And they looked at a whole bunch of frequencies from about 1 hertz to 40. And they found that flashing lights at 7.8 hertz stimulated maximum blood flow in the brain. Don't know why, but maybe we have a natural... Add
a ketogenic diet to that, and boy, oh boy. Anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you entirely.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, so it spun off from, me taking what was kind of a new age, almost a scam, and turning it into actual science. And we've got 24 studies now done on our gear. Senior studies, one Alzheimer's study where we took an early onset Alzheimer's. The lady was 57 and she was in Seattle. And she went from shuffling around the senior's home, and after 30 sessions, she moved back into her own home and would walk through downtown Seattle to get more treatments. And in the course, and they brain mapped her throughout, and she was entirely normal. But the biggest change that happened, not only did her delta and theta waves go down, but she reestablished an alpha rhythm.
Wow.
And without that alpha rhythm, our brains fall to pieces, is what we're finding out.
So what kind of program were you using for her? What type of programming of the device?
We're not using alpha.
Right.
We're finding that stimulating, and this is one of the things about entrainment. The official sort of physiological definition of entrainment is that you stimulate a biological organism with a frequency, and it will respond with that. It'll basically resonate at that frequency.
Right.
In this case, we put a frequency into the lights and into the eyes and the ears, and the brain will set up a brainwave pattern at the same frequency.
Right.
And there is some truth to that, but not very much.
Mm-hmm.
It also
The brain isn't that linear. It's very nonlinear and dynamic, and it will oftentimes respond in ways you don't expect, right?
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's what we've been finding out, is that there's no hard and true rule for entrainment. It increases cerebral blood flow. Normally speaking, as you know, with the neurofeedback model, if someone came in and they were really high, like they were ADHD, let's say, and I had such a lady who was ADHD, and she was peaking at about 7.5 hertz. So her brain was slow. She could only read 2 paragraphs, and she was fogged out, and she was failing in university. And because I was having a lot of cerebral blood flow conversations with Herschel Tumum, who was doing cerebral blood flow biofeedback.
Herschel, yeah.
Yeah, he was great.
He was a good guy.
Yeah. So I took this lady and I mapped her. And I should mention, I bought a brain mapper well over 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, to prove entrainment worked. Because nobody would believe me on the behavior model. Everybody wanted to see EEGs and quantitative.
Yeah.
So I took this girl anyway who could only read 2 paragraphs and was peaking at 7.5 hertz, and I put her on the Schumann, saying if Schumann really increases cerebral blood flow, I should see it bring all her activity down when at least when I turn off the device. The entrainment might drive it up while it's in training, but when I shut it off, I should see all her bad brain waves go down, and good brain waves go up. And so that's exactly what I did. I trained her for about 30 minutes. Normally, you got to wait for the brain to have sort of a little recovery period. So we waited 15 or 20. I remapped her. Now, instead of being way off the norms, she was almost normal. And she read 10 pages before she started to lose her concentration. So I was able to prove the cerebral blood flow model could also rehabilitate someone's brain. Mm-hmm. But then there's more. There's neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, is generated in pretty big quantities. And so is norepinephrine to some degree, so are endorphins from flashing lights. That basically in the alpha band is where the study was done. But other studies have shown that, as you know, ATP is very important chemical in the body for body function and so on. And with entrainment, the brain is basically running a marathon, and it switches from metabolizing oxygen through glucose to ATP. Mm-hmm. We also see that lactate goes way up, and lactate's a real important, it's not really a neurotransmitter, but it's such an important chemical in the brain. It activates glia, which nourish the brain. It activates norepinephrine, which is the brain's adrenaline. Mm-hmm. It activates all kinds of things in the brain, and people with TBIs are low in lactate. And low lactate levels are also associated with panic disorders and anxiety. And so we take people with panic disorders and anxiety, especially if it's tied to a head injury, put them on entrainment, and they're immediately calm. And that's partly why the U.S. military buys so many. There's no technique that will do this. Yeah. But there's even other things. Heat shock protein is an incredible protein in the body that protects us from pathogens and injuries. And a guy did a study showing that with entrainment, heat shock protein almost doubled.
That's very cool.
In the brain, yeah. Well, he did salivary heat shock protein study, but yeah. And then there's dissociative induction. You know, we can take someone who's going literally through a panic attack and put on the glass on, and they immediately calm down. So we use it a lot for heart rate variability, just to teach people how to breathe, you know, especially people who are struggling with traumas of all kinds. So there's that. So there's so many things that entrainment does that in actuality, the frequency part is rather insignificant. Mm-hmm. But everybody sees it as that. So on the TBI stuff, here's an example. These guys don't make alpha waves. So they've lost all those connections. All the networks are down to their thalamus. And so they have severe anxiety and they have a bad sleep disorder. And they're always obsessive compulsive on top of it. They have their anorexics, hoarders, counters, cutters, ritualists. But they're all OCD. And we used to put them on alpha, but it never worked very well. And then reading some studies using needle electrodes and ultrasonic stimulation and things, it turns out you have to stimulate the brain really hard to fire it back up. So I tried an SMR beta protocol, and 15 minutes later, I'm seeing giant alpha spindles, though I never gave them alpha at all. Right. And their behaviors immediately improved. They would comment, wow, the bag is off my head. Yeah. I can think. I can see there's no more fog. I can see. Yep. See through the fog. And we have got people, one lady 20 years after a car accident, shuffling around her house, completely dysfunctional. Her husband looked after her. They got her on entrainment. 3 months later, she went back to college and got her PhD. Another lady I'm working with now in Edmonton here, Elisa, who you'll see in my YouTube video, she was 5 years post-car accident. And, you know, and the psychiatrist had doped her up on all kinds of drugs, messed her up. Everybody gets messed up more, it seems, by the medical
Yeah, no, they
system
totally
first.
do, yeah.
And her house was a mess. She couldn't work. She had 2 teenage boys. She couldn't manage them. Got her on entrainment. 18 minutes later, bang, she's pounding out these big alpha waves and goes, oh my God, my head is clear. And you'll see it in the lecture, in the YouTube lecture. And now she's working on her master's.
So this is just your beta SMR program, so your device, basically, this device that you've developed, has a whole bunch of pre-programmed settings on it, different types of programs, things for, you know, for cognitive function, things for meditation types of, you know, and relaxation, even things for sleep. And there's, kind of more of a kind of a brain brightening, as I recall. I'm trying to remember your little
brain boosting or brain brightening, brain boosting. Yeah, Tom Budzinski called it brain brightening. Some of our first senior studies.
Yeah, I remember Tom.
Yeah.
So basically, you don't have to know a lot about this to use this device. You know, there's a manual that comes with this, and there's a bunch of pre-programmed stuff in it that you can just press a few buttons and away you go, basically. Yeah. And so what you have, there's a set of glasses, right? Very stylish. With they're embedded with some, used to be these grain of wheat little bulbs and whatever that you were using, but you're not doing that anymore.
No, but there's a little story to that too. Like the bulbs you can't get anymore, but the bulbs slow the stimulation down because you don't want to stimulate like a strobe is. They call that a square wave, where it's instantly on and instantly off.
Right.
That's not good for the brain, and it triggers harmonics in the brain, and it can trigger anxiety
and seizures.
And such. So you want the lights to turn on kind of slowly and off slowly.
Right. You have to worry about seizures too, photoepileptic seizures.
Possibly, yeah. With square waves, yes. As soon as you round your waves and you turn them on and off kind of slowly, all the seizure risks are gone. And I've worked with actually quite a few people with seizure, and we've helped them with entrainment. But we had to completely redesign the product because LEDs turn on instantly, whereas bulbs turned on slowly. So when we went to LEDs, we had to put in a digital to analog converters to slow it down. And we would actually put a sine wave table in the computer chip, and it would play out that table, and then the lights would come on nice and gradual and go off nice and gradual. And so we had to implement those things. Actually, we can do 3 or 4 different waveforms off the devices, but one of the things that I was seeing with other equipment, because everybody else makes square waves, because computers make square waves. You're digital 1 or digital 0. So when you're turning on your ports on and off, they're instantly on or they're instantly off, but they're not gently on and off. Mm-hmm. And we realized long ago that was important for all kinds of reasons, but certainly triggering anxiety was one of the reasons for sure.
Yeah.
And we even saw that happening. You could take someone with, I teach it in my course actually. If I give people, let's say, who are not making alpha because they're stressed out and stuff, and they need to increase their alpha, you can give them alpha, but if it's a square wave, it will make beta harmonics.
Yeah.
And they'll grow and grow and grow, and then a person will sometimes have an anxiety attack.
Sure. As
a result of that. So we always use sine waves on everything from alpha down. Because we don't want to make harmonics. In the beta range, I do make a more aggressive waveform, but never a square, because we want to stimulate the brain a little more. Right. On the cognitive side. So I have a bit of it's still kind of roundy, but there's a little bit of a square top on it, and it rounds off in the bottom.
A little more of a modified square wave type configuration.
That's right. Yeah. I call it a semi-sine wave.
These are really, really nice little headphones, and they're somewhat adjustable, and they're good quality. So certainly much better quality than a lot of other companies selling devices that claim to be similar to yours, which aren't.
Yeah, they're not high end, but they're good mid grade headphone. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Although you can use any of your own personal headphones too, and some people will use earbuds when they're sleeping, right?
Yep, that's totally true, and I've done that.
But I would say lights do the majority of the work.
Yes.
As far as we know. Although the tones really do help with a couple of things. They help people to dissociate. And dissociating in a meditative sense is important, because so many people getting on the gear are in such, they're in such excited states of flight or fight response, and they're so agitated, and they're off the edge, and they're screaming at people, and they're screaming at themselves. I can tell you, we've had cases, we've saved several marriages over the years with this gear. And one of the examples that was pretty funny that we've seen a few times now is a guy comes home from work and he screams at his family. And he's all stressed out. He has road rage on the freeway, screams at his family. They're ready for a divorce. And he phones up. He says, I'm about to get divorced. I don't want to get divorced. So this is my last ditch effort to try one of your crazy new age nutty machines. And I go, no, there's real science on this. Don't worry about it. Just put it in the parking lot. When you get off work and you're all tensed up from a high pressure job at the office, just recline your car seat, put the gear on, run a 20 or 30-minute session in your car in the parking lot. Knock yourself out. And then when it's done, take 5 or 10 minutes to kind of wake up before you get on the freeway, and then go home. And guys phoned me up, and 2 months later, they said, wow, you saved my marriage. I used to go home and scream at everybody. Now I go home and I hug everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I used to go home and drink a whole bunch of beer or whiskey too on top of it. Now I don't drink.
You're reminding me of another application for this. If somebody were to buy an extra, eye set, and they had an extra set of headphones sitting around, and they had a couple of splitters, it is possible to have a shared experience on this thing, which can kind of help put people in sync a little bit. I've had some very interesting experiences with that in the past. Yeah,
a lot of couples have had shared experiences, and my wife and I have done that too.
Yeah.
Try different things, but you can certainly knock yourselves out and wake up really rested together.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. It's good for jet lag that way too.
Well, and also, there's all kinds of new research now showing just how powerful just a 20-minute power nap can be during the day to restore your cognitive function to fresh levels. A lot of times people, they're working in front of the computer all day. I wouldn't know anything about that. And then, your focus starts falling off or whatever else. And so people go and they get themselves a cup of coffee, or they try to keep it going. But the research shows that actually, far from boosting things back up, the performance and cognitive function actually drop.
Pretty true.
But just a short power nap, and it all goes back up to the freshest, most optimized levels again. But it's hard to take a power nap, especially if your head's spinning with everything you're thinking about, and you lay down and your head's chattering away, or God forbid you fall asleep because you're exhausted, and then you wake up a couple hours later and you're groggy and not knowing which end is up. What's so cool about this device is that, you can set it for like a Schumann session, or like you say, or, just like I think you have one called coffee break. And it's like taking a brief power nap. And it's taking your brain and it's moving it to where it needs to go. And then beautifully, it brings it back again, right?
It does. Anyone who gets overstimulated, this is a real bonus for them. When I go to conferences, I always have to bring a half a dozen with me, because conferences are so overstimulating that people can't sleep.
Yeah.
And so I'm lending out my gear to other clinicians who will use it to get some decent sleep, and so they can get through the conference without being so exhausted.
Right.
Especially if they have to lecture next day and their head's all scrambled and they just can't lecture. So they need this. But yeah, this puts you in some I've used it hundreds of times for when I've been stressed out, getting a little overworked. It's amazing how overworked you can, or how stressed you can get in the relaxation business.
Yes.
And
no kidding. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. And so sometimes I got to get out of it, and I got to pop on the gear and get a session. I get grounded before my next client shows up, because I just get too unsettled, right?
Right.
And again, and as too, it's been well documented that to do highly cognitive activities, you must be relaxed, you must be calm. And when I'm interpreting brain maps and all that stuff, I've got to be settled, or or doing math or engineering, because I still do electronics design.
Yeah.
If I'm wound up, I can't do it. I've got to be settled down. And it's like that with musicians. You're writing music, writing poetry, writing anything actually requires.
You want to do anything worthwhile, you want to do it from a calm-centered place.
Yeah. Language and speech really, and social stuff require huge resources in the brain. And we've got to be calm to do it. When you think that we've got 3,000 so far cataloged facial expressions, and they're all fleeting, as soon as you get people who are stressed, what's the first thing they lose? They lose their ability to be social.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they lose their ability to be social, they have a tendency to get aggressive with other people because they lose empathy when they can't read people.
Mm-hmm.
And so just by getting people on this, getting people relaxed in a high-paced world, which we unfortunately have,
right,
it really helps people on the social side. Even on the politics side, when you look at politics, and of course America has got very polarized politics, and it's, especially lately.
Yeah, I stay out of it, but yeah, I hear you.
But sales of anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressants, and sleeping pills go way up prior to an American election, especially the presidential election, right? So
I'll bet liquor sales have been pretty good ever since.
Machine and calm yourself down. Pardon?
I said I'll bet liquor sales have been pretty good ever since.
Oh, I'm sure liquor sales go way up too. We really got to invest in all these guys.
Yeah.
You make some money during American elections, but if people use the equipment, they can get through that much better.
Right.
Plus, whenever we get in flight or fight, we lose our ability to see other people's perspectives. And that gets us cut off from our friends and family and everything else because we get too rigid and dug in, to our beliefs. So whenever we get calmer and more relaxed and get out of flight or fight, it's easier to look at someone else's political views or their religious views or their lifestyle
easier to be open and have a discussion, right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to accept a person.
Right.
Yeah, when you look at some of the best virtues that people have, that we completely lose them instantly when we're in flight or fight. That's empathy, compassion, and forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
We lose all of that. We're in a flight or fight response. It's all about me protecting my ego.
Right, exactly.
And so this really can help people get out of that, and I call it a Christmas brain. Help you get into a Christmas brain.
Well, I don't know. Christmas is actually considered the most stressful time of year for a whole lot of people, but this can help you get through it, folks. So there are a couple other things I want to touch upon quickly because we don't have a lot of time left, but there are a couple other things that are kind of integrated into this device. Well, one optionally, that are probably worth touching upon. And one of them is CES, cranial electrostimulation.
If you get the high-end device, yes.
Yes, in the high-end device, which is what I have here, the Delight Pro. But also something called heart rate variability, which is a biofeedback tool. And it's really cool that you've integrated some of that into here. And maybe talk about that really quick.
Yeah, heart rate variability is really critical. People who've been in motor vehicle accidents, rape victims, military. They've been finding that just corporate executives have a higher percentage of PTSD than a lot of war vets do now. Life is such a rat race. And so when we start getting, say, all flight or fighty and all anxious and overworked and stressed out and overstimulated and kind of losing our groundedness, we lose our breathing. We get chesty, we get short, we get rapid. We start what I call breathing like a chihuahua. And kind of a breath.
You do that a little too well, Dave.
Yeah. I've raised dogs for a long time, so yeah, I'm good at it, aren't I?
Yeah, you are.
Me and a couple dogs get together, and we have a good time.
Yeah.
They think I'm one of them.
Yeah, I'm a cat person personally.
Yeah, you're a cat person. But one of the things that happens, unfortunately, with heart rate variability is that there's an effect known as afferents, and afferent with an A are incoming nerves. So all our senses are incoming or afferent nerves. Motor nerves, like moving our arms and stuff, are efferent with an E.
Right. Where it's
Thing called
phonetic.
afferents, where our brain often doesn't really know what our emotions are, that the amygdala is triggering, which is the amygdala triggers a lot of our fear responses. And our brain isn't always that in touch with how that we're going into a fear reaction until it notices how our body is doing. And when it notices we're breathing like a chihuahua, it's like, oh my God, we're in a dangerous situation here. Something's going on that's bad. And that further throws the brain into a flight or fight response, triggers, of course, all the adrenals and cortisol and all that stuff gets triggered. And then it takes 3 hours to calm down. If you can and train, and so we've got, anyway, a lot of people who can't breathe because they're now also I should mention brain injuries.
Mm-hmm.
With brain injuries, people lose their ability to breathe. Don't know why, but heart rate variability falls all to pieces and the more severe a brain injury is, the worse their breathing is.
I would imagine it might matter a little bit too in terms of the type of brain injury.
It might, but a lot of people who are doing brain injury aren't really looking at types. They should be.
Yeah.
Because there's neuronal injuries and there's network injuries and combined.
Or brain
a lot of
stem.
injuries are combined.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I agree. That's one of the problems with medicine. They do MRIs, and most of our clients that we have all passed MRIs with absolutely no indication of a brain injury.
Well, freaking MRIs cannot tell the difference between a living brain and a dead one.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
Cannot tell the difference.
Right.
True. And so there's a lot of brains with no scar tissue that are not functioning, that need to be fired back up. But the breath pacer is so important. And I've got so many cases from between brain injuries, stress and anxiety, people who were abused as children or post-car accidents or other things, and they cannot breathe anymore. And so part of training them out of
people can't breathe in a healthy manner, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So
they're not oxygenating themselves appropriately, right?
Yeah, we have to teach them how to breathe in a proper meditative manner, but a lot of them cannot do it. Mm-hmm. Their brain is too racy. I've got an example on our website of a lady who just went through a separation with her husband after he was charged by the police for molesting 2 children. And they had 2 children, and they lived in a small town, and they were threatened to be lynched or have their house burnt down. She got out. He followed her, and she didn't want him to follow her, but he followed her, got a court order to give him control of the kids or on weekends, alternate weekends, which scared the dickens out of her.
Yeah.
So she couldn't breathe at all. But on entrainment, people who are going through such a state of flight or fight and anxiety, who cannot breathe, you put them on entrainment, and typically in 10 minutes, their breathing is beautiful. And their heart rates can drop 20 beats a minute as well. Because often when they're that upset, their hearts are they're laying down, resting heart rate is about 100 beats per minute. And it'll slow right down to 70 over a 10-minute period.
So you have something built into your device that helps facilitate better heart rate variability, right?
Yes, we have an actual heart rate, a heartbeat that plays. And we've got it set up for 24 beats a minute. So if you inhale for 2 beats and exhale for 2 beats, that's 4 beats per breath cycle. And that works out to 6 breaths per minute, which is what a lot of meditation breathing is based on, is about 6 breaths per minute. And for those people who just cannot breathe because they're so scattered and upset and they can't think clearly and they can't process an actual cue that's paced, when they're in training, they just let all of it go. And very quickly, they get into a beautiful breath pattern. Our new device that clinicians are really starting to get on board with actually runs off the windows. And it changes color. It trains you, and you can pick any frequency you want. But let's say we're picking alpha for meditation. It'll change colors to tell you when to breathe in and when to breathe out. So instead of saying breathe in, breathe out, it just changes colors, which is kind of like a suggestion.
Sure. Much gentler.
Yeah, it's much more gentle. And therapists who are saying that they've got these tough clients that they just cannot treat with heart rate variability, as soon as they put them on those glasses, they say in minutes they're breathing beautifully.
That's awesome.
So that's really cool. Yeah,
we're going to keep pressuring you to get this somehow for Mac.
Well, I've got Parallels running on my Mac, so I can do it. I run Windows through Parallels. Oh, but yeah, you're right. We do not have a Mac version otherwise. No.
Yeah.
It was hard enough
So,
for us to make this work with Windows.
right. So you also have, in your top shelf model, the Delight Pro, you also have an application on it for adding CES, which is also known as cranial electrostimulation. And I'm very, very familiar with CES, and that's been something I have played with for a really long time. But you actually have a pretty decent CES device built right into the thing that is an optional. You don't have to use it, or you can use it by itself, or you can combine it with the audiovisual entrainment, right?
Yes, it really complements entrainment nicely. Now, a lot of people have brainstem issues, especially if they have concussions. They will often have brainstem issues, and but a lot of people have brainstem issues for various reasons. And the CES has been shown to roughly double endorphins and serotonin output from the brainstem in a 30-minute period. And Sheely did some of that work. We've used it a fair bit for, a drug rehab and stuff like this. Again, panic, anxiety attacks, depression. And it really complements the light and sound.
Right.
And in the case of people who are having drug cravings or they're trying to quit smoking, of course, what happens is, let's say you take the drug and then hours go by, and then of course you're starting to get cravings to take the drug again because you have an addiction. And that anxiety builds and builds and builds until you retake the drug to get the anxiety down. Well, all you have to do is put the unit in your pocket, put the clips on. Most people think they're like earbuds. Most people don't really notice them, and just run the CES through the device, and it'll just get you through that anxiety.
We're just talking about very, very subtle microcurrents. It's not like you're shocking yourself. You're not experiencing any discomfort with it. It's just these small microcurrents that, what is it?
It's a little pitter patter.
Yeah.
I kind of equate it to the tactile sensation, or the physical feeling of the cat purring.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. See, there you go.
That's kind of what it's like.
Here in the States, the FDA has approved certain types of CES devices as for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. So, the CES application on its own has a very wide range of applicability. We can't make medical claims about it, of course, but it's a useful tool, and I think a particularly helpful tool, and it can be used in a wide variety of ways. And you can use it to coordinate the stimulation along with the audiovisual, stimulation effects, and you can have it go along with that, or you can just run it on its own, or whatever it is you want. I think for a lot of people, what it is going to amount to is playing around with this device and finding what works best for them. But you have a pretty good manual that comes with it.
Yeah,
you've got a ton of stuff on your website, and
hundreds of pages, just hundreds of pages, and more videos we're adding all the time.
Yep.
In fact, tomorrow I plan on recording my CES video, my CES lecture.
Oh, cool.
I've been teaching this at Siever University for several years.
Yeah.
And so it's time I got it more into the public domain. So, but a little bit on the CES side, to make the medical claims like depression, anxiety, insomnia, it must be a prescription device. Most of all my customers are psychologists who can't write prescriptions, and most couldn't be bothered. They don't understand this stuff, right? So we're using it not for depression, anxiety, insomnia. We're using it to boost mood, to relax your mind, and to help you sleep better, which are non-medical terms, and just for general wellness.
Right.
And so that gets the FDA issues
out of the way. Yeah.
Out of the way, yeah.
Yeah. So let's, so how can people purchase one of these devices, right? And how can we sweeten the pot if somebody, say, wants to purchase a device and say that Nora sent you? What are you willing to offer people that contact you through, using my name through this?
Yeah. Well, if they say Nora sent me, we won't give them one. But if they say, awesome, Nora.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. Then we will definitely listen because, well, you're awesome. And we got to make sure that everybody knows this.
Gosh.
Yeah, what we can do is we have a breathing program
Hmm.
with heart rate variability, and it teaches you how to breathe to the device, to the heartbeats that are playing. And it has a couple of tracks that you can actually, MP3 tracks, you can just download them onto your, your smartphone or something like that, and you can use to play them. They're combined with entrainment as well as the breath pacer, and you can use them when you're flying on a plane, if you need a little break at the office, you're getting stressed out, in traffic. Maybe wouldn't play while you're driving, but because the entrainment might make you a little groggy, but you can certainly use them as a way to recover from stress and
Yeah.
get much more relaxed. And we'll be glad to throw that in at no charge.
Oh, Dave, that's very generous of you. And you really, we've known each other for like a really long time now, and you're like family to me, and you're one of my favorite humans, and so I'm really glad to bring you to my
My
audience.
favorite human.
Totally. It's really great bringing you to my audience and exposing them to really the amazing work that you're doing. And
Very much.
this has been way overdue. So thank you so much for taking the time today for this. And hopefully we'll maybe do some more of this again in the future, eh?
Hey,
Gotta
I
speak
like the way you
Canadian,
talk.
right?
Absolutely. I was just going to mention, after 35 years of hard work, we're think we're going to start seeing overnight success.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, it'll all be tickety boo from here, right?
It will be tickety boo from here. It's getting that way now.
Yeah,
Tickety
yeah.
boo, for those who are listening, is a Canadian expression meaning everything is going just perfectly.
Just aces. Yeah.
You bet.
All right, Dave.
It's
Well,
been a
thank
pleasure,
you.
Nora, and it's always so wonderful to see you and chat with you and interact with you.
Yeah.
It's always fabulous. Thanks
Yeah,
very
yeah.
much for the opportunity to be on your podcast.
Well, wonderful. And I look forward to getting together sometime soon, because that is like way overdue. Yeah.
Completely.
All
I
right.
agree.
Thank you.
Yes.
And
Bye.
more soon.
You
Happy
bet.
holidays.
Yeah, absolutely. Merry Christmas to her.
Yeah.
Happy holidays
Yeah,
to
yeah.
everyone. Thank you
Okay.
very much.